So I think we're good to go. Yep. Okay, well, welcome everyone, and to our panel today, which is focusing on the global role of food systems in addressing the twin threats of climate change and biodiversity loss. Now, the Secretary of State will be joining us shortly, but before he does, we will start with an introduction to the panel. So we'll go from my right. Theo, would you like to say where you're from? And that'd be great.
Thank you. I'm Theo de Jager. I'm a farmer from South Africa. I farm subtropical fruits and timber. I'm also the president of the World Farmers Organization. We are based in Rome, and we represent farmers on all 6 continents. Some of our members count amongst the smallest and the poorest, and some in the most high-tech, mega format agriculture can come in.
Thank you. Pablo.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure being here with all of you. I'm Pablo Montoya. I'm representing the FACT Dialogue, but I'm also the Sustainability Director of Grupo Éxito, which is a retail company in Colombia.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
Mark.
Hello, I'm Mark Given. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at Sainsbury's. I look after sustainability, and for those who don't know us, because I know there's a global audience, we've been at the heart of Britain's relationship with food for 152 years, and absolutely believe we've got a role to play in terms of healthy, sustainable food for all.
Great, thank you. Minette.
Thank you so Oh, gosh. I've got such a loud voice. It's normally not what people want me to have. But anyway, hello, everybody, and a huge privilege to be here today. So Minette Batters, Wiltshire Beef, Sheep and Arable, and President of the National Farmers Union, and very excited to be at this COP here in the UK, and really hoping and praying that this fires the legacy out of this COP that really will drive the biggest conversation that the world has had on this very subject. So thank you, Emma.
Thank you. And Helen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Dickinson. I am the Chief Executive of the BRC, which is the British Retail Consortium. We are the trade organisation for the retail industry in this country. And I mean, I've been overwhelmed actually by, I only came yesterday, but so many inspiring people and hearing the real sort of business involvement in many of the commitments. A big retail food industry one today by Sainsbury's and others. So it's great to have the opportunity to talk about this and to highlight as well. We have an initiative with the BRC, which is all across the retail industry, our climate action roadmap, but I can come on to that a bit later.
Excellent. Well, that's a neat segue into an introduction to myself. Emma Piercy from the Food and Drink Federation, and I lead on the climate and energy change policy work there. And in fact, my introductory slide is taken from our handbook, which we're publishing on Tuesday. So like with the BRC and the NFU, we're now all aligned towards an ambition of net zero by 2040. And this diagram for me sort of sets the scene nicely in looking at how the carbon footprint of the UK food system is made up. And what we see is 66% of the carbon footprint of food is from ingredients, half sourced from the UK, half from abroad. And for me, that really shows, how dependent, of course, we are on the environment, and then, our responsibility to, both reduce our impact on the environment, the carbon emissions, and restore nature, which, of course, is the subject of our panel discussion today. And couldn't be better timing, if that's okay, George. I'd like to introduce the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs to say a few opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here, and a very timely moment for this particular discussion, because of course today we've moved the focus to nature. We always wanted COP26 to have a big element for nature in it, partly because we've argued for a very long time now that we think nature can provide around 30% of the solutions to both climate change and also helping to mitigate the impacts of climate change. But also, of course, because next year we've got some important things coming up with the CBD COP, which is going to set those all-important biodiversity targets going forward, and we wanted to use this to try to help get some momentum that could carry into that. And I think it's been quite successful in that we've managed to get some really substantive and widespread commitments now on deforestation, halting the loss of forests by 2030. But of course, words are not enough. And so the other key thing that we've got this time that we've not had previously is financial commitment from donor governments to help underpin that. And today we've moved the focus to sustainable supply chains, sustainable forestry and agriculture and trade. And that I know is the issue that you're addressing here today. It's also the issue that's dominated the sessions we've had in the plenary sessions in the main hall. And I think the first thing to say is that the FACT dialogue, as we're calling it, it's all about sustainable forestry and commodities and trade, has actually been quite successful. We've managed through both G7 and here to get a coalition of countries, all of whom now are committed to implementing policies to improve due diligence and sustainability in supply chains. And there's a really important role to play here for those companies that are buying forest risk products to ensure that they are only buying products that are sourced sustainably. And we're going to create a legal requirement to ensure that the products they source are not sourced illegally or linked to illegal deforestation, which is a first, a big step forward. We're hoping that other countries will follow us. And a little bit earlier this afternoon, I was at an event organised by the Council for Sustainable Business. And I think the really positive thing here is there's so much enthusiasm from British business and the food industry in particular to play their part, to reduce their carbon emissions, to really apply sustainability. Many are signed up to the Get Nature Positive campaign, and there's a Nature Positive handbook that's linked to that. I think we're starting to see real enthusiasm coming from business for this. And of course, the steps that we're taking through the reform of our agriculture policy are going to put more emphasis on making space for nature, sustainable agriculture, soil health, regenerative agricultural systems. These are all the types of approaches that we want to support. I know you've got Minette on your panel. Minette was basically attacking me almost this morning when I saw it because we weren't going net zero fast enough, because the NFU are obviously supporting and think they can, as an agricultural system, get there even quicker with the right approach. So it's a very important discussion, I think. We've really wanted to make the food system and agriculture a big part of the discussion today. I think all too often, the food and agriculture debate, because it gets becomes often a stalemate over an argument about subsidies and who subsidises and how they subsidise. Often at events like this, it's seen as a bit of a no-go area because people assume it'll be deadlocked. But I think we have managed to engage in some sensible discussion here today, and we have managed to get countries starting to think differently about how we should support agriculture in the future. So that's all for me, but back over to you for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. I think the point I'd like to draw upon as well is that's come up a number of times today is around the need for collaboration across the supply chain, and that's why I'm so pleased that we have such a great panel with us today. So thank you for joining. Now we have done our introductions already, so we can now go on to the panel section. We have these three key areas. So I shall kick off. Theo, the first question to you. Globally, how would you describe the impacts of climate change on food systems, and how do we need to respond?
The impacts of climate change do not recognize international boundaries or farm boundaries or the seas between continents. What happens in one part of the world can impact anywhere else. And no one is as vulnerable to climate change as the world's farmers are. But at the same time, I firmly believe that no one can do more about it in a shorter space of time and on a broader basis more efficiently than the world's farmers can, if they would take ownership of the message. And they will only take ownership of the message if it makes sense to them on farm level, in their livelihoods, in their businesses. Hence, it's extremely important that we remain consistent in the way we send the message over to farmers. In the Kyoto Protocol, there was nothing about agriculture at all. We had a massive fight to get the word food security into the Paris Agreement. And all of a sudden, agriculture is in the crosshair of everything that went wrong in our food systems, and they say we are responsible for 30% of the emissions, and we need to transform these food systems. For farmers, we have a direct interest in how to transform it. Farmers want to know, what must I now do on my farm with this planting season? And how will I be capacitated to do it? Does the financing mechanisms allow for that? Can my business survive it? And how will I ensure that what I do will also be duplicated by all my neighbors? Because if I work alone on climate change and my neighbors do not do so, it will boil down to nothing. And the real answer for us as farmers is that we start at the bottom, literally. We start in soils. 90% of what agriculture can do, both on the mitigation and the adaptation side of climate change, we do in the soils.
Thank you. Pablo, this week we've seen the COP26 pledge to end global deforestation by 2030. How do you think this announcement will support the Fact Dialogue programme in accelerating the transition towards more sustainable land use practices and encouraging food businesses to source sustainably?
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to all of you for joining us. I think it's a huge progress, considering that the countries that signed the declaration represent 90% of the forest worldwide. So now we have a commitment that is allowing us to get finance, to encourage partnerships. And through partnership, I think we are achieving and probably going beyond SDG 17. Like, this is not going to be solved, as Theo was saying, by just one country. Like, we all need to act together. I'm from Colombia. Colombia is the second most biodiverse country worldwide. So we need to keep the Amazon and protect the Amazon forest. It's not the forest of Colombia. It's the lands of the earth. So how we all work together. So I think the declaration is a huge step forward. I think we also need to think about new strategies to reach communities, to protect indigenous communities, but at the same time, how we incorporate them in supply chain or bringing social and economic benefits at the same time. These are probably the communities that have been left behind. So that's a message as well that we need to take care. My point at the end is it has to be beyond a declaration. We need to act.
Yeah.
So now we have all the political process. Now we need to act and transfer that into action. And I think that's a critical point. Strengthen partnerships, bringing financial, involving all communities into the supply chain. I think is a huge process that we still have ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Minette, I'll come to you next. What's your view on this pledge to end deforestation and the Fact Dialogue in relation to how UK farmers can engage with this?
Well, can I just... I don't want our Secretary of State thinking that I was attacking him. That's... I feel I need to address that point first. That's never a good position for a lobbyist to be in. The point, and a really interesting discussion in the plenary this morning from all over the world. And the point for us, when we were the first farmers' union, if you like, in the world, to say, actually, we can do this by 2040. And that was beating the government target. But the reason to do that was agriculture was kept out of the room. That has been a massive, massive challenge. And I think, agriculture just provides all the solutions. And when we look at deforestation, so Georgia was very much in support. And actually, for your predecessor, it was about saying, this is an exciting industry. We all know Georgia's been excited about it from the start. But it really did excite Michael Gove. And I think it's transformed government thinking now, this journey to net zero and what that means. But when we look at the opportunities on deforestation, yes, it has to happen. But back to Theo, with all the world's farmers. I'm really proud to sit in the room with the African subsistence farmers alongside the Russians, alongside the Americans. And that is the thing. It is about all the world's farmers. And deforestation is going to impact on some countries. We've heard what Indonesia has said. So looking at the opportunities as we go forwards of things like insect protein, the work that Ferrer has been leading on, those are game-changing. Now, I feel very privileged here in the UK. Life is relatively easy. I'm always amazed on the world stage when I talk to others across the world. They're not even farming in peacetime, something that we take completely for granted. So looking at what we are doing here, but being able through knowledge transfer, which we've got now, everybody's got a smartphone. I was amazed when I was out in Zambia, they got a smartphone. So we can do it, but if we're gonna deal with the deforestation problem, we've got to be able to create these circular economies on proteins going forwards as well. And yes, we wanna source sustainably on soy and soya, but we've also got to create more out of our own natural resources. And one final thing, if I can, I really think, talking to Secretary Vilsack here, it's very interesting what is going on in the US and very much mirrors what we are doing in my part of the world by bringing huge acreage together on biodiversity net gain, on water quality, yes, on carbon, which is the sort of sexy item, but we've got to drive economic value back into the land. You know, we've got green finance whirling above our heads, you know, multi-billion-pound projects, but we have got to drive genuine economic value back into the soil. So as farmers, not just here in the UK, but as farmers across the world, we have got to develop new trades. We've got to have trades in biodiversity and water quality and carbon that are genuine and honest. And only by getting the resource back into the ground, Emma, will we truly achieve the changes that are needed. We can't just keep shining a light on farmers and saying, you are the problem, guys. We've got to develop a new economic model.
Absolutely. Helen, one for you now. I have a question in from the Latin American Association for Food and Beverages. And they say that Latin America is one of the most biodiverse and climate hotspots in the world. At the same time, there are pressing needs related to hunger and development. It has been said that with no healthy soil and no sustainable planet, there won't be a sustainable food system. So the question is, what more can producer and consumer country governments, like those that have come together in the FAT dialogue, do to support food businesses to source sustainably?
Well, I think you mentioned in your opening remarks, Emma, you talked about the importance of collaboration, and I think that has been a major theme running through the whole conference. And certainly, if you look at us all as members of the public, then the goods that we buy, whether that's food or other clothing, you know, electricals, that is about 30% of our own personal carbon footprint. And the majority of that is food. And the majority of the impact of that food that we consume as members of the public, that impact, the majority of it sits further down the supply chain. So if a retailer, and there are some in this room, make commitments about their what they want to do in the short term, in the longer term, then they are completely reliant on their suppliers, and they are sourcing goods from all over the world. So that can't just be about what happens here in the UK. It's got to be globally. And I think the most important thing is to have a common language, a common understanding, because part of the issue is because we don't have consistency in what we're measuring, in the language that we're using, and therefore, you know, from a supplier point of view, they've got information overload because now everybody's sort of gearing up and it's all getting really confusing. So how can we use that, coming back to the collaboration theme, how can we use that collaboration to really bring that consistency, to talk the same language so that those conversations, those actions, that delivery further and further down the supply chain can actually be delivered?
Absolutely. And Mark, and with directly engaging with the end consumer in your company, stocking the food that we put on our tables, how do you think demand for sustainably produced food could be increased and ensure that benefits and incentives reach the farmers in producer countries?
Yeah, we serve about 20 million customers a week, and we absolutely know the demand for sustainable products is there. Customers trust and expect us to have sustainable, deforestation-free, products on shelf, and that is driving us to take action. You know, we've got very strong commitments on carbon in relation to science-based targets. And by 2025, we've committed to be deforestation free across all our main commodities, soy, palm oil, timber. And it's absolutely critical we take our customers on that journey. And we've put helping one eat better, which we think is about sustainability and health, right at the heart of our strategy. The second part of your question is, you're absolutely right. The benefits of sustainable production have to be visible to farmers, be that farmers in the UK, and be that large-scale soya farmers in Brazil, or actually some of the smallholders working on palm in the Philippines. So the commitments we make, we hope, send a strong signal. There will be more access to markets for sustainable production and into that shelves, and that's the role we can necessarily play. We certainly see investment in forests or in smallholders and farmers as an investment in biodiversity and an investment in the future.
Lovely. So we've heard quite a bit now about around the issues with the FACT dialogues. We're now going to move on to the next theme around nature restoration and carbon offsetting. So my first question now, back to Theo again. So in seeking to reduce the carbon emissions from food, and indeed the wider impact of food systems on the natural environment, how can consumer businesses and governments create a stronger, clearer demand signal for sustainably produced food and ensure that these benefits and incentives reach the farmers? So quite sort of a similar question, but very interested to hear your take on it.
What I hear from you is, how can the other stakeholders in the value chain assist in this effort? Now, there's a very good reason why in agriculture we speak of value chains. It's because you cannot push a chain, you can only pull it. And the only pulling force is the market. Farmers will always produce what the market would buy from them. Farming is a business. So you want to change food systems, you want to change the way we approach issues such as climate and biodiversity, you start with the market, you sensitize the market. And if the market demands a certain standard, farmers have no choice but to abide by that standard. You must remember that we are consumers too. Farmers are consumers too. And in our engagement with consumers up to now, we were not the masters of communication. If I could point one thing which we did wrong as farmers over the last few years, it was in the way we interacted with consumers, communicated with consumers, even when we really tried hard to do it, especially in our neck of the woods in the global south. It was more of a one-way communication. We seldom sat with consumers and asked, exactly what do you demand from us? And consumers in 2021 are mostly urban people who get their food from shelves and shops. And for them, the world of food often stops at the shelf in a shop. And they understand very little of the world behind that shelf. Not everybody now has an uncle or a grandpa who came from a farm. So we really need more consumers, especially children, to come onto our farms and to see what farming is all about, and to see how the mix of sunshine and seed and water and soils be turned to what we have on our plates.
Yeah, absolutely. Minette, I think I'll come to you next. So in terms of reducing carbon emissions, there is that phrase, you can't manage what you can't measure. So what guidance do you offer farmers, and the challenges? What challenges are there in calculating sort of the carbon footprint?
Well, I think this is the elephant in the room at the moment, and our advice to our members is to use the tools that work best for you and your business, thinking across all sectors, all land areas. It is very, very different, and certainly the feedback we get from our membership is there is at the moment not a one-size-fits-all, and yet in the next breath everybody will be saying we need a one-size-that-fits-all. So this is a massive challenge in the UK. And then when we think of an internationally recognised tool, I'm just not sure. I mean, that doesn't exist now. I think it will exist. But it is all about data, data, data. It is all about evidence, evidence, evidence. And if you don't have the evidence, you can't build honest and reliable data sets. And I would say that to a certain extent, I mean, carbon is the sexy item, but it is the most complex and underdeveloped market yet. So we've got to effectively work through, and should probably have worked through, water, biodiversity, get everything right so that when the carbon market is really able, because don't forget, we have got to, as a unique sector in food and farming, we've got to deal with our own house before we start effectively selling off our crown jewels. So the carbon offset market is go very carefully. Let's sort out what we are doing. And then, yes, obviously, you've got a very, very viable market that probably is only going to grow and grow in value because land is finite, and the more carbon we can lock down. But this is, Emma, I think, where innovation, R&D, where we really, really need to turbocharge it, because if we don't have the evidence, we will never have the right data sets. And it is the Wild West at the moment. We should be under no illusions. It is the Wild West out there. Everybody is entering into it saying this is very, very exciting. There is a huge amount of money to be made. But we've got to make sure that those monies, too, go back into the land. And at the moment, those monies are not hitting the soil. And they've got to hit the soil, because that is ultimately what we're all trying to achieve.
Thank you. Pablo, following on from Minette and Theo's thoughts, what more, from your perspective, do you think governments and businesses can do to foster and enable innovation on modern sustainable farming? And I'm thinking also touching upon this carbon offsetting aspect as well. How could we achieve sort of greater investment in some of these nature restoration projects? Could carbon offsetting help?
Sure. Look, the FACT dialogue has been an amazing process. Like, we've been participating in it like from 1 year ago. So there is like a multi-stakeholder coalition of action trying to put all perspectives together in order to set some points. So I'll be back to alliance and partnerships. I think that was one of the key points that we found. Then we also need to think about the bottom-up strategies. So. And I'm going to say an example that I usually mention when we were in the discussions is, like, palm oil is a driver of deforestation in Southeast Asia. And now in Colombia, we have palm oil. And I'm certifying palm oil producer, but they are not driver of deforestation in Colombia. But because it's a huge problem, so now we are overlapping problems to other continents, even where it's not relevant. I should be working on beef, for instance, which is a priority as well. So we need to be careful on what are the priorities and where, because in that sense, the top-down strategies sometimes fail. So that's a point. And as Minette was mentioning, I think I'm going to say that from the retail perspective as well. We all are dealing with traceability, with data, with monitoring systems. And I think we have gained progress. We are doing a lot of process on our tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, sometimes tier 3 or 4 suppliers, but still we haven't reached the point where we are confident, at least not in Colombia. So there we also have opportunities to go beyond, and I think the FACT dialogue as a process worth the effort, but it needs to keep working on the new challenges that we are going to face.
Yes, thank you. So we're now coming on to our last section around customers and consumers. Mark, first one to you on this section. So thinking about healthy and sustainable diets, what are you seeing as the most important levers, incentives for behavioural change towards more sustainable diets?
Yeah, we know customers often lack confidence to vary the diet and perhaps build more plants in there. I saw a stat this week that said 75% of global food comes from 5 animal species, and I think it was 12 types of plant. And there's just so many benefits from diversifying that. In terms of the thing that we're looking at, incentives work. We've got, for those who shop with us, we've got nectar points. We run, gamification on fruit and veg. We saw that drive 500,000 customers, 15% increase in fruit and veg consumptions into the diet. We have to make the healthy options more affordable. We've got 30 key fruit and veg lines that we've invested in to bring them to a 60p price point, which we know for many customers is really important. The government has got Healthy Start vouchers for low-income families. We've supplemented that with an additional £2 per week that's only redeemable on fruit and vegetables. We've heard about innovation. That's going to be hugely important. We've got over 1,000 plant-based products, which is part of the solution, but we've also got a long history of reformulation actually and taking taking, salt and some of the things out of food, but still maintaining that nutritious, delicious bit. So those are some of the things. We've also got to drive action internally, and targets are part of that. We committed earlier this year that by 2025, of the tonnage of food we sell, 83% will be healthy or better for you. And those are important to drive action, against of our food team. So those are some of the things we're working on.
That's great. Helen, we'll come to you next. So retailers and hospitality businesses have a crucial role, as we've just heard, around communicating messages to consumers, whilst also influencing the supply chain, as we've discussed. How would you recommend that hospitality businesses, particularly SMEs, engage with the zero carbon agenda?
Well, I think implicit in your question is a really important point, which is that whether it's a retail business or a hospitality business, they have that front-facing interaction with their customers. And as us all as members of the public, we don't want to do all the research. We're confused. We don't know which choices necessarily will be the best ones. So from whether it's a retail business, a hospitality business, whether they're a large business or a small business, being clear from the point of view of what would make the most difference to their customers. So this is where things like being clear on data that everybody's talked about earlier, to be able to so that the retailer or the hospitality business can put their prioritization in the right place. But I don't think we should underestimate that communication, that relationship that exists between the business and the ultimate customer, because they can really, really influence those behaviors. And if you think of what we've been talking about here today around the food system, whether that's the choices around what people eat, that's one of the two sort of biggest impacts, and the other is about what they throw away. And I think both of those things are really critical, whether it's a retail business or a hospitality business, it's that interaction with the customer and helping them make those better choices.
Absolutely, and I think that's the perfect segue into a question I have from Richard, so I'll pass the mic to you, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. And just building on that, I mean, the United Nations Environment Programme did a report on the Food Waste Index report earlier on this year, which shows that household food waste is a global problem for the first time. And it's not just a high-income country problem. In fact, on average, we throw away the average human body weight in food waste every single year. So what role do you all think governments, businesses and farmers have in helping address this crucial problem?
Okay, that's a great question. I'm going to answer from the retail perspective. And in Colombia, we measure the food waste, and it's equivalent to nearly 30% of the food production. So, of course, it's a major challenge. We need to, I think, 3 stages that we need to take care of. Like, we need to start to measure, because what you measure, what you are not measuring, you are not managing. So I think we still gaps for doing that. With the Consumer Goods Forum, with the Food Waste Coalition, is one of the main steps that we are all working with, and disclaiming the information as well. I think we need to create more accountability towards the process. The second point, and probably is very related to Colombia, is solidarity. So we are the largest donors of food in Colombia to the food bank systems. So there we are benefiting nearly 500,000 inhabitants of Colombia just because of the food donation, food in good quality. And the third one, which I think involves all of us, is culture. I think what I was mentioning to Mark before, that visiting a farm, the farmers say people is eating the peel, not what's inside. If you take a banana, it can have a black spot, but if you open it, it could be perfect. But the people is not taking it because of the black spot. So the people is eating peel, not the fruits. How can we transform the culture, educate, and go to the bottom of this point? And I'm going to add something that I didn't answer the offsetting point, but it's something that I'm thinking about, just not to go so long. But I think we need to go to understand what benefits can we give to the people which is protecting the land? Now we are doing payment for ecological services, but what else? What's the KPI for the industry to pay for biodiversity, to pay for water? So in that sense, we can have in one land multiple actors protecting the same territory, and I think that could be also good for the offsetting, which we all are thinking on race to zero, but at the same time, what's the KPI for the other environmental points? You know, forest is important, carbon is important, but we need to go beyond.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, we're coming close now to the end of the panel, so I will now ask the panellists to have some concluding remarks. So 1 minute tops each. Helen first.
What am I going to conclude after hearing that? I mean, I think I will come back to my theme of collaboration, because we have some industry bodies here. I mean, you are an industry body with the Food and Drink Federation. We are from the retail point of view. We have the farmers. We have countries as well. But I think the role that businesses with other businesses with their suppliers, businesses with bodies like ours and similar, whether it's NGOs or governments, that to me is so much the theme of what has come through today and through the course of the week so far. So I really hope that I think actually I was listening to Simon Roberts, who's the chief executive of Sainsbury's. Give Sainsbury's a bit of a plug. He said competitive advantage can't come into this because it's too important. So I think my overarching theme is the importance of putting aside those competitive differences and really working with each other, whether it's across the supply chain or with other similar businesses, to drive that change.
That's a good summary. Minette, what can you add?
Well, at the risk of being slightly controversial here, to pick up on the last point on food waste. We waste in this country, I believe, about £16 billion worth of food. And then when you look at that across the world and the points that have just been made about this is not just the preserve of wealthy nations, effectively. This is hitting everybody. And yet, when we talk about climate change and the consumption of food, where does everybody go? At the moment, what affects the people that I represent most is what they see as a heartbreaking conversation around meat versus plant. And it is about the sustainable production of both. And if we look at it in a true and honest manner, the greatest emitter, and I'm hoping the fertilizer businesses aren't in the room, because this is not aimed at them, but the greatest emitter is nitrogen fertilizer. What we are doing with working with the fertilizer businesses and making sure that we are precision farming, we are focusing on exactly where these things need to go. That is absolutely where we need to get to. So we need to focus. My closing message is, this is all about education. We do not value our food in a way that we should, or we would not be wasting £16 billion of it in our country. And, for Tamara here as Permanent Secretary, for George as Secretary of State, they have to make a phenomenal case to Treasury for £3 billion worth of funding. Even if we solved a quarter of the food waste issue, we'd have the budget. So we absolutely have to do it. And we have to change the conversation. And we have to really focus on sustainable production of both meat and plant. And we have to start educating people to value their food.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to use the wrap-up to talk. One of the topics that's come up a lot, actually, is eco-labelling and product labelling. And actually, Minister Power talked to this morning in the context of the Environment Bill. And I can see why there's been a lot of energy, because it's really simple for customers. And actually, product and packaging, lives long in the fridges and freezers, can really help to educate. The point I'd make on that, just to back up what Minette said, actually, it needs a huge amount of collaboration. At the minute, there's a proliferation of approaches, and there's not consistent data sets and standards and methodologies. So you may have seen this morning, we had 5 retailers coming together on the WWF, and we've got 2 priorities for that where we need to collaborate. One is the measurement of Scope 3 carbon in the supply chain, because if we can come together and at least have a consistent voice, we think that can add to the confusion. And the second is to bring the industry together to see how we can make it easier for customers. For context, it took the UK industry 20 years to get to a common methodology on red, amber, green on health products, and we don't have 20 years. So we're going to make that a focus. So that's it. So from a Sainsbury's perspective, we're here, we're listening, we want to be engaged, we're humble, and we want challenge, we want to work with everyone as part of the solution.
I mean, from my perspective, and from the manufacturer's perspective, that's absolutely what we want to work towards too. So definitely agree with everything that's been said so far. Pablo, your closing comments.
Okay, no, just to summarize, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure. It's a lifetime opportunity to be here, to the Minister, to all the UK government for hosting the event. I would like to highlight maybe what I've been saying, like how can we promote more partnerships. Climate change, as we have been mentioning, is not something regarding some specific countries, and other will be like with money you can pay whatever you're gonna need in 30 years. It's something that we all need to work, we all need to get together, and it's like the air, like we all breathe and have the same air, so we all need to work together. I think that's one of the main points that the FACT dialogue is working towards this, getting financial processes, social caring in communities, indigenous communities. I think those are the main conclusions, and once again, thank you very much. Yeah.
Theo, last word to you, or nearly last.
Thank you. Can you believe that after all these years of discussing emissions and carbon, both the emission side and the sequestration side, we still do not have an internationally standardized and accepted accounting system? And until we have that, we're not going to move forward with it. And on the issue of the food loss and waste, it was very interesting for me, Emma, to see on your slide that here it is only 0.5% the food waste part. Elsewhere in the world is much higher. It's calculated between 30 and 35%. Now, if you talk food loss and waste, what farmers hear is financial loss and waste because somebody paid for it. If it was wasted downstream in the value chain on the other side of the farm gate, at least we got paid for it. But the losses is mostly on our side of the farm gate. And we need a serious re-talk about standards, about what fruits and vegetables look like, the black spot on the banana. Because nature does not produce everything perfectly. A farm is not a factory. And there's a lot of good stuff that goes, that's lost because consumers buy with their eyes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, look, thank you very much, everyone. And I think that's a very good closing remark. It's spot on. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you, Secretary of State, for your remarks as well. It's much appreciated. And thank you.